Welcome guys, I am Vikram Kakar, a student of ACAS Cloud. Today we will have a look at how to configure NSGs, network security groups, and create the inbound security rule. Let's just begin. So I have already created the resource group. Now we will create virtual networks. I'll just call it my VM. I'll create two subnets today. One is public and one private subnet. Now I will create NSG. So we'll go on the left, or you can go on the search bar and type network security group, and you can select from there. So I'll create the NSG. I will create two NSGs today, one public and one private. Now that the NSG is created, so this is a public NSG, I will create the inbound security rule. I'll go to add, and we want to enable remote login connection to our VM. So we create our own rule for that. So for that we select IP address. I'll paste my IP address over here. The port I'll leave it any. The destination will be private IP of the VM. So it will be IP address, and I'll type 32. And I want remote login connection. I'll select remote desktop, RDP. I'll leave the priority the same, and I'll call it allow RDP. So the rule is created. We will now associate the public subnet with that. Click OK. Now I'll create another NSG, and this will be a private NSG. I'll call it private NSG and create. I won't be creating any inbound security rule over here because this NSG will be associated with a VM which has no public IP. So we will log into it from the virtual network itself. I'll just associate the private subnet to it. I'll select my VM and I will select the private subnet, and I'll click OK. The NSG has been created. Now I will go and create two VMs. I'll create one VM with a public IP and one VM without a public IP. So first I'll create a Windows VM with a public IP. In the public inbound port, I will select none because we have created our own inbound security rule anyway, which will enable us to do the RDP connection. On the networking page, I'll select my VM already selected. I will select the public subnet, and I will select public IP over here. I've already associated the network security group, so I'll leave this none. While that VM is being created, I'll now create a Linux VM without a public IP. I'll leave the public inbound port to none because we will only be logging from within the VNet. On the networking page, I'll select the VN I have created, and I will select the private subnet. And in the public IP, I will select none because we do not want any public IP. And the network security group, I will select none as well because we have already associated one. And I will review and create. So the Windows VM with the public IP has been deployed. Now remember, we have created our own inbound security rule, that is to enable RDP login. So let's see if that works. I will copy the public IP, paste it over here. So we have managed to log in to the Windows VM. So the inbound security rule which we created on the NSG has worked. I'll just switch off this enhanced security configuration. Now we created another Linux VM without a public IP. We will log into the Linux from this VM. And again, we have not enabled any inbound port in that. So let's see if that works. I'll go to internet first of all, and we will download PuTTY. We have installed PuTTY. I will open the PuTTY software now. Now we will log into the Linux VM from this. So I will enter, and we haven't enabled any public IP for the Linux VM. So we will log in via the private IP of the Linux. Right, so the login to the Linux VM has been successful. So this means that all the inbound security rules we created have worked. Today what we saw is we learned how to configure network security group and attach it to a VM and a subnet. And then within the NSG, we created our own inbound security rule, and we created our own RDP rule, login connection. We logged in remotely to the Windows VM, and then from the Windows VM, we logged into the Linux VM, for which there was no public IP enabled. So hope today's session is useful for you guys. Thank you very much.